Blast Alex here. One thing you all may not know about myself is that along with 2D mediums, I'm also a plush artist and sewing enthusiast. I've hand-sewn fursuits and fursuit parts, created a handful of plushies, and repaired some of my own things in a crunch. I really enjoy machine and hand sewing, and am of the belief that sewing is an important and creative skill for anyone to learn. This is why I'm going to talk at you for however long this video pans out to be about making plushies. If you don't know how the plush making process works, that's alright. I'm going to explain everything and walk you through how I handled each step of the process. Full disclosure though, this is not a tutorial, and with how the end result turned out, I wouldn't recommend treating this video as such. However, do feel free to sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy learning about making plushies. Without further ado, hey guys, gals, and pals, my name is Alex, and I'm your professional seamstress for today. Let's begin with the very basics. How are plushies made? How do you make one? We start with our pattern. These are pieces of paper that you use to cut out your fabric to the right shapes. These are the foundation and guide to how plush is put together. Some patterns include step-by-step guides for you to follow in the sewing process. I highly recommend finding a pattern with instructions if you're starting out. Once you use your pattern pieces to cut your fabric out, the sewing begins. First, you join together triangle-shaped divots in the pattern called darts. These provide shape and create the actual forms of the plush when you stuff it. After all the darts are sewn, the main construction of the plush begins. All the seams are sewn with the right sides together so that the thread doesn't show through in the finished product. There's extra techniques in finishing construction of the plush, such as invisible stitches, but that's pretty much the shorthand of the process. If you are interested after this video, I'm gonna link some resources to get started sewing and plush making in the description. Anyways, back to the goal. I decided one day on some whim thinking about Dolly's factory that, hey, the characters in the game are canonically plushies. And I know how to sew. And I've made plushies before. Thus, I set myself up to a pretty decently sized project, making Buddy from the game Dolly's Factory into a real-life plush. For this project, I wanted to attempt the daunting task of drafting my own pattern to work from, instead of buying a pre-existing anthro base someone else has gone through the work of making. I've actually never done this before, except on select parts of projects, such as the hair and clothing on this plush of a friend's OC. So to get started, one has to ask, how do you even make a plush pattern? There's a few ways actually. Method 1 would be the oldest method, thinking of how the 3D forms looked unwrapped, estimating a pattern, sewing the entire thing together, and seeing how it goes. Then one would tweak the pattern from there. This usually takes several renditions to perfect and get a good plush pattern. Method 2 would be to craft a 3D sculpt, either out of foam or clay-like mediums. I've seen people draft plushies using Play-Doh and paper towels. This can be done on any scale, as some plush artists opt to make a small-scale sculpture, draft the pattern pieces off of that, and scale them up after the patterning process is complete with math, or just photocopying the pieces and printing them larger. Method 3 is the newest and most tech-savvy method, 3D sculpting a model via a 3D modeling computer software and uploading it to plushify.net, where you can then create a pattern from there that will near perfectly match what you've made modeling. I, of course, am a Neanderthal, so I chose method 2 for this project. The first thing I did was make a paper mock-up of how I wanted the plush to look visually, shape-wise, and the placement of elements. Then I traced my mock-up pieces onto foam blocks and carved the big shapes out. These pieces are going to become the base I will use to pattern the base of the plush. If you don't know what this tool I'm using here is, this is called an electric knife or electric carver. It has two serrated blades that hook together and drive back and forth to cut things smoothly. These are actually used primarily for culinary purposes, like cutting through meats and bread, but they've been very useful to me in carving foam for things like fursuits with good precision. As always with handling sharp objects, point the blade away from your body and/or fingers and make sure you are under supervision if you're younger. With the foam base all done, the patterning stage begins. I first layered saran wrap over the foam to protect it and cushion from the duct tape layer I put on top. Now I begin marking the center line and sectioning pieces off with a marker to indicate where I'll cut the duct tape off the base. I mark in red where there are color changes, like Buddy's arms, face, legs, and tummy. I translated the shapes I took off the duct tape pattern onto paper and marked the pile directions. This will be important for later. It's in this stage where I like to do all of the magic. Embroidery. For those of you that don't know, this is an embroidery machine. If you've ever seen really dense, precise stitching on plush details like eyes, mouths, paws, etc., these are what make those happen. I insert my USB drive with the embroidery files I designed on my computer using InkStitch to tell the machine what to do. Then I edit the size and placement to the desirable degree. I then lay out my fabric according to the placement of the design on the hoop and cut. It's hard to see, but I clamp both sides of the hoop to make the fabric taut. This and the sheet of stabilizer I lay below the fabric makes the fabric strong enough for the machine to embroider without moving. I then rethread my machine to the first color I'll be embroidering with. I slide my hoop and click it into place. Then the embroidery begins. Throughout the process, I'm rethreading the machine with each color off camera. I find this part mesmerizing and love watching the machine go. I finish each eye, and then move on to the nose and mouth and embroider that. While I'm at it, I join the two lighter and darker pieces of the face together. Then I move on to the next stage, cutting out the pieces according to the pattern. I align the direction the grain of the fabric goes, called the pile, and mark out where I'll be cutting. I also add roughly ½ inch of seam allowance, essentially extra wiggle room for the stitch to live so I'm not sewing right on the fabric's edge. Fun fact about the fabric I'm using, this is called medium pile minky. It's used for things like baby blankets and plushies, and has some unique properties that make it great for these sorts of things. It stretches in only one direction, perpendicular to the pile. Now that all the pieces are cut out, I move on to sewing the main body together. Here I'm showing how I've clipped the front and back sides of the head together, right sides in. And this is what it looks like turned inside out. Then I go ahead and get started on the body. And we're done! And here's the main body all finished! I noticed before I'd even turned him inside out, the fabric was looking all wrinkly. I don't exactly know how this happened, but my theory is that the pieces I took off the foam base didn't fit together perfectly, so instead of cutting or adjusting the pattern, I just squished the minky together and kept sewing, essentially creating ruffles in the seams. Either that, or I'd been sewing some pieces stretched out and had fabric left over that I would have then, again, squished into the seam. At this point, I was feeling extremely discouraged and actually shelved the project for 3 whole months. But I eventually recouped, got some other life responsibilities out of the way, regathered my motivation, and came back to it with a fresh pair of eyes and hands. The first thing I did was finalizing the stuffing and closing the open seams up with what's called a ladder stitch, hence the shape it makes before it's pulled tight. Also called an invisible stitch, because, well, it's practically invisible once it's done. At this stage, you might have noticed, he's bald and earless, and naked. But I'm gonna fix one set of those things right now. The ears and hair. There's a few ways to draft hair for a plush, but I employed my favorite technique, paper towels. Here's the mock-up I made using a few references at different angles of Buddy's hair. I then marked each piece and traced them onto a piece of Minky folded over itself and pinned right sides together. I made sure that the pile was the same on the top and bottom. I then sew all of these together in one big chunk to save some time cutting out each piece meticulously before sewing. I also sew the ears while I'm at it. I left an inch of space to turn each of the 9 hair tufts inside out and stuff them. I did this thinking that the smaller the hole, the more time I would save on ladder stitching them shut after stuffing, but boy was I wrong. Turning and stuffing these hair pieces took ridiculously longer than I'd like to admit because of how finicky the stuffing is trying to go in such a small opening. But alas, I ladder stitched each tuft close and pinned them to the head. I actually tacked all of these onto the head off camera because they're so tightly packed and precise. I had to have him crouched over in my lap. But I'm incredibly happy with how his hair turned out. It's probably his best feature considering everything else went interestingly. Please don't judge him. He's so ugly. I finished sewing the ears shut and tacking them onto the head. And only at this point is when my brain clicked and was like, hey, that's Buddy. Anyways, I make another mock-up for his tail, cut and sew each side, and then joined the sides. This is actually when I skinned my finger from the needle clamp screw, so it's always fun to draw blood in a project. Anyways, I turned, stuffed, and tacked the tail on with little difficulty. Though, I probably should have used a lighter thread instead of a darker color. Once that's done, I'm on to fixing our next observation. His nakedness. I picked up some cool looking fabric at the craft store that I thought matched his vest pretty well and cut it out. I'm cutting out these divots you see here because I'm going to be sewing each of these folded over itself so it creates a nice trim around his vest and prevents the fraying of the fabric. So, I immediately noticed I should have had more seam allowance, and this fabric might be too light and small for the sewing machine because it got a bit skewered is the best way I can describe it. Something has gone wrong when the backside of the fabric looks neater than the right side. But at this point, I'm in a time crunch and I've already used the materials, so it just has to do. I dug through my button jar and found a gold, metallic-ish button that I decided would suit my needs, and I sewed it on and cut a hole in the other side of the vest for the button to pass through. And that's that all done! Finally, we move on to the bow tie. Again, there's a few ways to do this. There's no single correct way to skin a cat, or make a plush. I opted for the strategy of sewing a rounded rectangle of Minky, turning it, and pinching the middle. I sew it all cinched up, and finally attach a thin strip of Minky around the middle. I then sew this whole thing directly to his neck because at this point I don't have Velcro and I'm really anxious to be done with this project. And the final reveal, drum roll please. Here he is! My baby boy buddy! In the plush! Would you say stuffing? That's kind of their flesh. For how many things went wonky and how weird he turned out, I think he's very cute. Ugly cute. His hair is definitely the best part of him, and the bow tie turned out way better than I thought it would. He has 0 snout and 100% wrinkles. This dog makes me so deliriously happy that when I saw him appear on Pillow Lore for the first time, I squealed. I love him and I'm glad he exists, and he's real now. Carla, your dog's off his leash running around. While he has grown on me considerably, there are several things I could vastly improve. I have a few ideas, but that's for another day. Seriously, thank you for sticking through this one. This project and video took a lot of time and effort, so if you like this sort of thing, you can let me know by clicking all the little buttons below of the sort. I want to make more creative process and art-based content in the future, but it'll motivate me if I know you all like it. Anyhow, I'll see all of you later. Happy holidays if you're watching this time of year. Bye!